Welcome back to Sports Rule Pod. I'm Nick Elam. Here we explore innovations in sports and the journeys of individuals who make sports great. You can find Sports Rule Pod on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Amazon Music. And there are many ways to engage with the podcast. You can do so by email, nick.elam@sportsrulepod.com, or X, Instagram, or YouTube @SportsRulePod. In the interview segment of today's episode, we're joined by best-selling author Scott Doyne, who discusses his new book, Navigating the Quarter-Life Career Crisis, and how his own interest in career transition stems from the way his long stint as an executive at Turner Sports came to an end abruptly. In the innovation segment, we're joined by Dr. TJ Hiley from LaSalle University, who shares his concept for the COLA draft mechanism, which might just be able to strike the right balance of some fundamental principles for what many regard as an ideal draft system, being able to give preference to struggling teams without incentivizing tanking at all. And in the next to last segment, we revisit the next to last scene of a surprisingly underappreciated movie, Traffic. Let's get to it. We are so fortunate to be joined by Scott Doyne. He is an ICF-certified coach and best-selling author who supports clients through career transition. He was also a longtime executive at Turner Sports, leading innovative partnerships with sports leagues, including NASCAR and the NBA. Thank you so much for joining us, Scott.
Thanks, Nick. Great to be with you.
So give us the quick rundown of the many different positions that you've held up to this point in your career.
Yeah, I'll try to make it quick. I am at a certain age where it takes a little longer. I just do it a little briefer. But I was always into sports. That's the first thing. And so when I discovered a sports management major at the University of Michigan, I was sold immediately. Got involved in sports TV production for the first part of my career, and ended up at Turner following my MBA. And so after doing some freelance sports TV production, then I went to the business side, got into Turner Sports around 2002, which really was sort of time to ride the internet coattails. And so I was managing part of NASCAR.com, some subscription products, got involved in NBA Digital in partnership with the league, ran a product strategy team across Warner Media, which is what Turner sort of became, and then ran a research and analytics team across Turner Sports, Bleacher Report, House of Highlights, which we had then acquired at that point.
So we are going to revisit some of those stages of your career, as well as the book that is now available about career transition. But first, I'm curious, just from one sports fan to another, but you have an interesting perspective as a sports fan. Is it still possible for you to just tune in to a sporting event and watch as a fan, or are you having the urge to watch from the perspective of a TV executive?
I cannot watch like a normal fan. I never have been ever since I started in production 30 years ago. There's just something about being involved on, the behind the camera side and the production side where you just notice stuff. You can ask my wife. I will comment on lighting and camera angles and missing the shot of a guy crossing home plate. No matter what it is, I can't shake that part of it.
Now, after graduating from the University of Michigan with a sport management and communication degree in the late 90s, you were a freelance producer, I believe. Is there a lesson that you learned during that chapter of your career that you still carry with you today?
Yeah, freelancing is an interesting world. And I think it's actually more common now to have that sort of gig economy and side hustle thing. But the lesson I learned way back when was say yes. If a crew manager calls you up and says, can you get to Tiger Stadium in 45 minutes? The answer is yes. Because if you stop saying yes, they stop calling.
Now, here we are in 2026. Are there elements of the sports landscape that are relatively new that you foresaw coming many years ago?
I think the one thing that has proven out, and we experimented a lot, since we hit the 21st century, which was player access and player fandom. There absolutely is still people cheer for their favorite teams, but with people moving a lot more than previous generations and being out of market and picking up new teams, and also just sort of getting to see behind the scenes of players through their social media handles. So everything we can do, ISO cameras, audio from NASCAR drivers, which was something we were on early. Anything to sort of be with that athlete through their life and their sport. I think we saw a lot of that early, but now the technology really makes it possible.
And a related question here in 2026, are there elements in the sports landscape that have come to be that you never would have thought would have come to be?
I remember, pre-iPhone, when we were in the flip phone era, or we had these little Nokias, watching video for the first time on a phone. And there's still something about me that cannot believe we watch TV on our phones while we're flying from city to city.
Now, during your time at Turner Sports, you were responsible for many innovative partnerships. Is there can you give us a glimpse of some of the innovative partnerships that you played a part in?
Yeah, I think, I'll start with NASCAR. I spent my first 7 years at Turner Sports with Turner Sports Interactive, and we partnered with NASCAR on NASCAR.com. We did something, I think this was unique to how Turner Sports approached representing league brands, is we also partnered with other broadcasters. And so we had this product we called Race Buddy, and it had a playful animated character even. And not only did we take advantage of that technology where you could watch individual cars go around the track in addition to the big screen experience, and you could see pit road, but we shared that technology with Speed Channel, Speed TV at the time. And so it wasn't just an innovation for ourselves. We always felt like we were creating for the fans. And if you're creating for the fans, you shouldn't necessarily hold it hostage on one broadcaster. You should leverage it for fans, no matter what channel they're watching. And you even saw a lot of that, we're the originators of the true March Madness experience across multiple channels, and March Madness On Demand, March Madness Live. And so that happened within Turner Sports, which was an extremely unique partnership with CBS. So I think in our history, our leadership always felt like we put the fans first. And so when you do that, you can create some really interesting and unique partnerships with people you might consider your competition, but you can partner with your competition for the sake of the fans.
It's interesting that you mentioned March Madness On Demand. That was the foray into giving fans some control over which games they saw, whether they saw them live or after the fact. Because up until that point, into the early parts of the 2000s, fans were totally at the mercy of CBS. That was the only network that showed games, and whatever game they felt you would want to watch in that region, that's what you watched. And you were lucky if you got some type of a score update or a live look-in, something like that. That seems like a long, long time ago. In the brainstorming process, thinking about different innovative partnerships, innovative ideas, were there any ideas that just didn't get off the ground, that were discussed, that maybe even went through the early stages of development that just never got off the ground?
Yeah, we had leadership in our division, Lenny Daniels and David Levy, that felt like if we weren't trying something that people called crazy, we weren't doing our jobs. And fortunately, a lot of the league leadership, Adam Silver, who we partnered with for a long time, like they really wanted to be at the forefront of innovation as well. And so when you're doing that, you are going to break some eggs, and that leading edge versus bleeding edge aren't that far apart. So we prided ourselves on failing. One project I was involved in early, as Apple was coming along, was downloading NASCAR races, like full races, to your computer, again, before iPhones. And I think the concept is still legitimate. There's a nostalgia to how people are consuming content, and always will be. But the truth is that all happened on YouTube. And so, while there is some download to own, capabilities for entertainment and movies and sports, at the time we were just too early, and YouTube had just exploded, and that was a better alternative for the fan experience.
Focusing on NASCAR, I'm a huge NASCAR fan. I get that from my dad and my grandpa. In the time that I've been a NASCAR fan, I've seen some major changes. Those include the introduction of a playoff format in 2004, which has been revamped multiple times. Also, the introduction of stage racing in 2017. Changes like that Certainly, television partners need to be on board with and have some level of support. I'm curious, how often do the television partners, are they actually the ones to introduce or propose changes like that?
I found that our league partners always had open ears, but they also had slightly different goals. There was a spirit of partnership where all ships shall rise, but it doesn't matter. Doesn't mean we didn't have different stakeholders or constituencies. So take NASCAR was a good example, but I think NBA All Star has gone through so many different iterations, and the cycle we were always in was not just the planning, but the debriefing. And so there was constant communication about options, alternatives, ideas. And I think that's great leadership, is to listen to ideas that come from anywhere. But there is inevitably some filtering, some analysis, some strategy that's involved in trying new things. And, whether it's the World Baseball Classic or the Four Nations with hockey, or, I think the All-Star, NBA All-Star ending this year went really well in terms of international versus US. So, you have to keep tinkering, you have to keep trying, and in the face of social reactivity, sometimes you have to do what you think is right and see how the data plays out. We definitely were involved in those conversations. We provided research and data. We did additional research when there were some ideas that we weren't sure about or they weren't sure about. So it's worth trying that stuff out. Sometimes it's extremely visible when you fail, and sometimes that's okay to take big swings and then try again.
Yeah, I know a little bit about those NBA All Star changes over the years. The In your career in TV, in the TV industry, so did you find yourself drawing most from your business acumen, leadership acumen, data acumen, or something else?
It's actually really easy. It's relationships. The sports business in particular is all about the people. A lot of deals are still done on handshakes and always were. And so trust and relationships and honesty and integrity, I think those things served me very, very well when it came to earning league partner trust, and then taking those risks together. That also helped me internally with my management, my leaders, and it even helped with my staff. The relationship you have with your team, you're only as good as your team is over time. So investing in their professional development, earning their trust, and marching forward together was all about relationship skills.
I love that. It's the balance of knowing the importance of data and what it can tell you, but then also having those skills to foster relationships too. It's so important to have both of those. I'm curious, in your work with data, can you think of a time when data told you something very different from what your gut would have told you?
Yeah, probably a lot of times. The one I'm thinking about was when we had Champions League rights for a brief period of time, and it was so much fun immersing ourselves in European soccer for the first time. But it also meant we had a lot to learn. We had some soccer experts on staff. One of the things we ended up seeing in our data, and we actually saw it in social media, which helped with our TV programming strategy, just to sort of talk about how those things interrelate, was Spanish language Champions League consumption was through the roof. And there was actually this willingness for non-endemic Spanish speakers to watch Spanish language TV, which was free over the air, instead of subscription, which we had on Bleacher Report Live in English. And so understanding that consumer purchase decision in a broader context where language spoken was not a barrier to a price sensitivity concern.
Now, we're here with Scott Doyne, who is an ICF-certified coach, a best-selling author, and former television executive with Turner Sports. I'm curious, during the early stages of your career, can you think of a good mentor for you during that stage?
Yeah, I'm going to go way back in light of my new book about Gen Z and career management. My career advisor in college is still a friend and mentor today. Her name is Shelly Kovacs. And, I call her my guardian angel from when I was in Ann Arbor at that time. I'd gone from a small high school to a big college. And she helped me not get swallowed up, but also gave me confidence to do some, leadership activities while I was there. And she's been a good friend of the family ever since.
Now, so excited to talk to you about your brand new book, which is available now. That's Navigating the Quarter Life Crisis. This podcast is meant to discuss career journeys. And here early on, we have someone who is an expert on the career journey. And so in the book, you discuss some of the stages of career transition. Can you share what those main stages are?
Yeah, and I can do it in the context of my own. What I left out of my bio earlier was that I was laid off from Warner Brothers Discovery about 3.5 years ago. And so after I had that research job and we were acquired by AT&T and then Discovery, there's just a lot of change going on in the cable industry. So in light of that possibility of being laid off, I actually had a light bulb, which would be the first stage, is realize. You realize it's time for a change, something's up, something doesn't feel right, or potentially you got laid off where that light bulb is very obvious. So realize and then explore what might you want to try next. And for me, I was open-minded, I was journaling, and then I ran into a session with an executive coach. And during that session, while I was open-minded about my future, I looked across the screen. I was like, I think that might be it. So that hypothesis then leads to articulation, developing those skills, developing my business plan, that eventually I did get laid off and launched that business. So the fourth stage is execute. So realize, explore, articulate, and execute.
So, in addition to all the experiences you had and the expertise you had in the areas of leadership, business, relationship building, data, being able to put out an enjoyable product on television, you also had to have some writing skills to write a book. Was that something that you always had in your back pocket, or was that something that you really had to develop your writing skills to get to the book?
Well, first of all, with humility, I just read that 4 million books were published last year. So I don't want to get too high on my horse that I published a book. I think it's good. I think I'm improving, but I'm not going to put myself in the pantheon of great writers just yet. But I did grow up, with a great English teacher in high school named Mr. West. I did work in the production side of the TV business, and so I was writing then. And then I was surrounded by some of the greatest storytellers of our generation. Even just somebody like Ernie Johnson, for example, right? You grow up and you work around somebody like that, and you realize what great writing and orating and delivery is. And so I think a lot of that was contagious. And so I'm inspired by great writing. Even Brene Brown and Adam Grant are probably my two favorite career-related or sort of self-help authors. I take inspiration from everywhere, but I also know great writing is about authenticity, vulnerability, storytelling. And in my books, I also channel contributors. So people that are also sharing their expertise, their advice, even the research I did on students, the Gen Z population, I use their words in order to communicate messages to their peers. It's not just me lecturing people.
Well, you're doing something right, because your first book, Exploring the Midlife Career Crisis, was the #1 bestseller on Amazon. Hoping for the same with your current book, Navigating the Quarter Life Crisis, or Quarter Life Career Crisis. I'm curious, you mentioned Gen Z. What is different about the quarter life crisis for Gen Z compared to previous generations?
Yeah, that was one of the big questions I went into my research with. And I went in, with a hypothesis, but open-minded. I think the single biggest difference is how they grew up with social media. Not only were they social media and virtual first, but they also lived through their teenage years during the pandemic. And so that isolation has changed their brain chemistry and their willingness or unwillingness to meet people in person and interact with human beings. But there's also the sort of social pressure, the timeline expectations, living up to other people's example. They say comparison is the thief of joy. And so if you forget that people are just putting their best selves on LinkedIn, you might just think you're behind all the time. And so that's a lot of where that anxiety comes from, and having those conversations and remembering that that's not all real. You're not running the same race. You have different goals. You don't have to be on the same timeline either. So I think that social media has just exacerbated the anxiety.
Now, in your book, Navigating the Quarter Life Career Crisis, you share a wealth of actionable insight. What insight are you able to share here in this interview?
I'm going to start super simple. Take a breath. I think there's a ton of value in that. And the theory of the book is actually if you can reduce your stress, you can take actionable steps forward in some direction. A lot of times in stress mode, you get fight or flight, but I'd add to that freeze. Some of the students I interviewed said, when they get overwhelmed, their brain just stops. And so if you stop and you're not moving at all in any direction, there's no chance at progress. So I actually think stress management, stress relief is the first step. And beyond that, I will never ask somebody what they want to be when they grow up ever again. My question is, what might you want to try next? So exploration, experimentation, I think is helpful once you've, reduced your blood pressure a little.
Well, even those of us past quarter life are experimenting with different things, like me with this podcast. We'll see where this goes. It's been a lot of fun so far, and hoping to see it grow beyond. So thinking about, as we wind down with Scott Doyne, the curious how people can find your new book, Navigating the Quarter Life Career Crisis, and then also how might they connect with you in other ways to help navigate their career transition.
The simple answer is scottdoyne.com or LinkedIn. But I'm also really proud to be partnering with a publisher for this second book named Ripples Media. So on their website, there's links to, I think, 12 online retailers now. Obviously Amazon, but also Barnes & Noble, Porchlight for bulk distribution, some local Atlanta bookstores have online presence, bookshops.org. So it's actually available much broader than when I self-published. So I'm excited about that. And I am always on LinkedIn, so please connect.
Great. Anything else you'd like to share?
No, I just hope people take that breath and realize that careers are not a straight line. There's a book I reference in the book called Squiggly Careers. So, you might think that you have to be in this straight line and know what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And it couldn't be farther from the truth. Try stuff out. And if you like it, keep going.
Well, thank you so much, Scott Doyne, for joining us today. It's been great.
Thanks, Nick.
In the innovation segment, we explore innovations of all types in the world of sports and at all stages of implementation and consideration. And remember, if you want to submit an idea of your own, you're encouraged to do so by email, nick.elam@sportsrulepod.com or X or Instagram @sportsrulepod. The innovation we'll explore in this episode is on a whole other level. And I say that up front because I don't want to discourage any of the followers of the podcast from submitting their ideas, because this idea is that good. And it's actually an idea that addresses one of the most pressing issues and highly debated issues that faces the NBA. It's an idea that's already found its way in front of the eyes of the top leaders in the NBA. And that pressing issue is tanking. And while there are many ideas that have been floated to address tanking, some of which are likely to be effective, some of which maybe not, even those ideas that would be effective in eliminating tanking might go too far in keeping struggling teams near the bottom of the standings for years and years. So the idea we will address in this episode might just find that right balance of eliminating tanking while also offering hope to struggling teams. And this episode is extra special because we are joined by the creator of the concept. His name is Dr. TJ Hiley, and he is an associate professor at LaSalle University and the chair of their mathematics and computer science department. Let's bring in Dr. Hiley. Thank you for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
So Dr. Hiley, please tell us about the COLA concept, that is the carryover lottery allocation draft mechanism.
So the brief version of carryover lottery allocation is, first of all, every team has a stockpile of tickets. And that stockpile is going to grow and shrink over time, and it's going to carry over from one year to the next. They get some kind of an increment. They'll get additional tickets if you miss the playoffs. And then if you win in the playoffs or you win a lottery ticket, that is when your stockpile gets reduced. So everybody's being treated equally if you don't make the playoffs. Equally meaning you're going to be getting some number of tickets, possibly the same number of tickets or possibly some formula, but the key is losses don't help. So if you lose more games, you're not going to get more tickets. That's the incentive compatible or anti-tanking part of that mechanism, that once you've missed the playoffs, there's nothing else you're going to gain by losing more games. And then we're helping the weaker teams by having things carry over. Teams that are weak are going to miss the playoffs more often, and so they are going to get that ticket increment more often, and they'll accrue more tickets over time. And then also, and that's because they are not going to be winning the playoffs, so they're not going to have their stockpile reduced. So that's COLA in a nutshell.
So, in the thinking big picture about how COLA is appealing, in your view, there's at least three fundamental principles that are necessary for an ideal draft mechanism. What are those three main principles that COLA is meant to satisfy at a minimum?
So two of them that are at odds with each other in most of the proposals. You want no tanking and you want to help the weak teams. Those are the two principles that are at odds most of the time. That we've got this push and pull of help the weak teams, but then if you help the weak teams too much, it induces tanking. So we're not going to help the weak teams quite so much. And so you see a lot of proposals leaning heavily into one or the other. And then the third one is it has to be practical. We have to have something that 23 owners will agree to, and something we can implement in the real world.
So sometimes in order to understand the concept that you're proposing, sometimes it's best to quickly visit some of the other ideas that are already out there in the world and on the table, and why they might not be as effective in addressing those three principles. So let's think about an issue of just trying to identify teams that are tanking and assigning penalties to those teams if there's some indication that they are tanking. Why is that not an ideal way to address tanking?
So just assigning penalties, that one I think it can actually stop tanking. It can actually, can in theory stop tanking, and it does in fact help the weak teams. The issue there is practicality, that you can't prove intent. We just had some penalties, $100,000, $500,000 given to the Jazz, and I forgot the other team that was penalized for tanking. But that wasn't actually for tanking; it was for violating the player participation rule. That even now, when you think, oh, these teams are being penalized for tanking, it's actually not for tanking because they have not proved intent. And that's the difficulty right there. That they said, you've got healthy players, they're not playing. That is the penalty, as opposed to you're losing on purpose. And it's very difficult to prove intent. And it's going to be even more difficult to apply that even-handedly.
Now, there's a gold plan, and I believe the gold plan is that you would actually give preference to a team that was not in the playoffs, but if they were able to accumulate the most wins after being eliminated from the playoffs, that would give them incentive to play well. Why is that not an ideal draft mechanism?
So I think the gold plan is an improvement on the current system, but the issue there is it moves tanking. Just going to move tanking to before you're mathematically eliminated, get eliminated as quickly as possible, and then try to win as much as possible. So the teams that are actually advantaged there are the teams that can have the biggest delta to say, I'm going to be bad, and then I'm going to be good and win a lot of games after. So the teams that are the worst, they're not even going to be able to win that many games, even if they are eliminated early. So that's the issue with the gold plan. But it is going to make for a more exciting ending, because all the teams trying to win at the end to see who can win the lottery. Does make for a more exciting ending, but it doesn't actually get rid of tanking.
Yeah, there's something to be said for teams trying when it's still trying when it's March or April. But if those same teams are clearly not trying when it's October and November, that's not so good either. Thinking about the wheel plan is essentially you disregard record, and it's just truly random, truly equally weighted, if I understand that correctly, giving out draft preference to teams. So what's not ideal about that?
So the wheel is a rotation. So over the course of 30 years, every team would take a turn in each position. And then it's also weighted. So within each 3 or 6 year cycle, you've got an average. So everybody averages out to be even within that cycle. The problem with that, and also with a flat lottery, is that you're not actually helping the worst teams anymore. So you're giving up on one of those issues of no tanking. Yes, we're completely ignoring the standings, so there is no incentive to tank. That's great. But you're also not helping the weak teams anymore.
And I just want to look at a couple other methods that are out there. So briefly explain how the WNBA assigns draft order and why that's not ideal.
So the WNBA, they're taking the average over 2 seasons of their record, but they're still looking at regular season. So there's an incentive to lose more games in the regular season. In fact, I think it actually makes it worse because you could be a playoff team. Say you're the 8th seed and you're thinking, well, I've locked in the 8th seed. Normally, there's no reason to lose any games. But if these are going to count towards next year's draft, you might as well lose because maybe next year you will be in the draft and these losses will help you next year. So I think it actually provides a stronger incentive to tank, but it does prevent strong teams. The first place team is not going to wind up getting the high draft pick the following year. So it helps in one way by helping the weak teams, but it doesn't really take away the incentive to lose.
And then one more, the Monroe and Boncio method. Briefly explain that.
So I do want to give credit to Evan Monroe, Martino Boncio. They are the ones who proved that you cannot look at end of season standings and come up with a mechanism that is going to get rid of tanking, at least not looking at that alone. So their solution was we're going to stop partway through the season and we're going to look at incentives to determine exactly when to stop so that everyone has the incentive to try for the playoffs up until a point. And then once a team figures, you know what, we're really not going to do well at making the playoffs, so now we're going to tank. They look at the incentives to figure out exactly when that happens. So 2 issues with that. One is you need a ratio of how valuable is a championship versus how valuable is a draft pick. And quantifying those things to the point of getting a ratio, I don't see that as being feasible. And more fundamentally, some teams are so bad that first game of the season, they look at it and say, yeah, we have no shot. Let's tank. And so there's no point in the season where you can say, okay, now everybody can give up their hopes of the playoffs, and now they're going to start tanking. There's not a point in the season when that happens. For some teams, it's day one.
So now we can revisit COLA concept. Again, it's practical. The idea of eliminating tanking means that there must not be any incentive to lose at any point. So take us back to exactly how the system works where there's just no incentive to lose games.
So the no incentive to lose games comes from the fact that once you're out of the playoffs, nothing else helps you. That all of the playoff teams, all of the lottery teams, they're getting the same benefit, or at the very least, they're getting no additional benefit from losing. So we could, for example, distinguish between teams as you've been out of the playoffs for 3 seasons, you've been out of the playoffs for 1 season, you're worse, you're going to get more benefit. But you're not getting more benefits for losses, you're getting more benefits because you're just a worse team based on playoff history. So there's no incentive to lose once you're out of the playoffs, and this is based on the idea that everyone has a priority of making the playoffs. Now, if people disagree with that, teams don't really want to make the playoffs, that's not good enough, then we have a mechanism to determine that and raise the line to say, well, if the playoffs aren't good enough, it's everybody who makes the playoffs but loses in the first round, you can all be in the lottery, and then only the playoff winners who make it to the second round, they're the ones who are excluded. So we raise the line to allow more people into the lottery to keep, to prevent tanking. That we allow you in unless you've reached the point where you really wanted to go in the first place.
And you mentioned one of the strengths of COLA, which is its flexibility. There's so many different settings and factors that could be adjusted if necessary down the line. And before we explore that further, let's make sure we have a good handle on COLA version 1.0, or what you see as kind of the default version. So it's practical, it eliminates tanking or de-incentivizes tanking. But then again, so does a format like the wheel that's randomly assigned. So how does COLA, if you could just one more time tell us, how does COLA, but while eliminating tanking, still give preference to struggling franchises and offer them more hope than, say, a format that just randomly assigns a draft order or gives equal weight to teams regardless of their record?
So I don't think we've said this explicitly yet. The key is that we have shifted from looking at regular season standings to defining the worst team based on playoff track record. So we're looking at the teams who have had no success in the playoffs in recent years, or they've had very little success in the playoffs. They haven't reached it. They haven't won. Those are the worst teams. Those are the ones that we are favoring. So that is the key. And because they miss the playoffs more often, they get that annual increment. Each year, whoever misses the playoffs or whoever's in the lottery, which may be the exact same set of people, but whoever's in the lottery, that's who we're talking about. The teams in the lottery, they get more lottery tickets. And so the more often you miss the playoffs, the more often you get those lottery tickets. And since they carry over, you're going to accrue more lottery tickets. And so the worst teams are gaining an advantage in the lottery, even though they're not getting any advantage from more losses during the regular season.
And I think that's the beauty of COLA, is that when you look at the current lottery system, some teams have really good luck. Other teams might not have such good luck in the drawing, the actual lottery drawing. Whereas with COLA, it factors that in. If a team has a good draw, then they're not given as much preference going forward. Whereas if a team's not getting that good luck, there is some grace for them. But then also, what I also like about COLA is we've come to think of draft order of that it should only be dependent on one season's worth of performance in most cases. But really, that's not necessarily the definition of a struggling franchise or a franchise that needs help the most. Sometimes that's more indicative over a long-term period rather than just 1 year. And I think that's an appealing part of COLA, is that it takes into account more than just 1 year in what it does. What other elements of COLA do you think are important to have a basic understanding of it?
I think that the two biggest things are the flexibility and the necessity. This is not just COLA, just the necessity of understanding that the playoffs may not be enough. Because as an academic, I guess I'm thinking mostly about this academic idea of incentive compatibility. And for our proof, in order for us to prove this is incentive compatible, we have to make the assumption teams want to have playoff success. And they want that more than the draft pick. And that's just not necessarily the case in the real world sometimes. So there may be seasons where if we have a static line and we always say anybody not in the playoffs is going to be in the lottery, there may be times when teams prefer the lottery to the playoffs. So we either have to raise that line permanently, or we have to have a way to detect it and raise it for a season. So that's the first part. And that's not just for COLA. That's universal for anything. If we're going to have a lottery, they're already talking about letting in the teams that were in the play-in. So that's one step in that direction to say, we saw Dallas intentionally lose a game, allegedly, from the play-in. So now they're talking about we're going to let teams into the play-in. Let teams that are in the play-in into the lottery. So maybe you extend that to the entire group of teams that lose in the first round. Or maybe we make it dynamic. So there are a number of different ways to do that. But the flexibility there, or maybe just raising the issue, is one of the contributions of COLA. And then you asked other things to know. The other thing is the flexibility to be able to meet whatever the goals are of the league. So I can imagine 30 owners having to agree to this. They're going to have different ideas on how much you help the weak teams and how much you don't. So that you want to make it so that a team who has been in the playoffs recently, what should their chances of getting a draft pick be? And it's up to them to tune COLA to meet whatever the goals are that they collectively want to meet. Because you can give bigger rewards for missing the playoffs. You can give bigger cuts for winning in the playoffs or for winning in the lottery. So the degree of which you adjust the stockpile, that's something that's completely tunable by the owners and how they would want to do it.
Let's back up and if you could share, when did you think of this idea and how has it evolved?
It must have been about 5 years ago. I had a thought and I had some conversations about it, and I didn't get didn't really get much pushback because I don't know if you know, but there are a billion ideas about how to fix the draft. And every time anybody says anything, somebody else is there to say, this is terrible and this is why. And I floated this idea to some people and nobody had any good criticisms. It was like, no, that's great. Sounds good. And I didn't think much of it until last summer. We had a summer research project. I suggested this as something that, you know what, maybe this is something we could make rigorous and actually get a result. So we started talking about this last summer, and then we had some meetings, did some work. We were meeting weekly throughout last fall semester. And then in December, there was this meeting that came out in the news that, hey, the NBA is talking about making big tanking changes. And so we kicked it into the high gear to get the paper out and say, wait, we have a good idea. Let's get this into the national conversation if we can.
What have been some of the most energizing moments of this process, whether that was a revelation that you had in affirming the merit of this concept, or a connection that you made, or some feedback that you received? Just what's a time or a milestone in this process that's just been really energizing?
I would say talking to you is one of the most energizing. I reached out to Dr. Elam when I realized that I had this idea and it was not gaining traction. I would talk to people. University marketing contacted some people in the media. We didn't really get a response, probably for the reason that there are a million ideas out there. But I knew about the Elam Ending. I knew that this was something that came outside the NBA and wound up in the NBA All-Star game. And I thought, well, his idea got in there. How did that work? So I called up or reached out to you, and I have gotten a lot of help from you. This is our first podcast interview. Hopefully there will be others to spread the word and gain some momentum for this.
That was not a leading question, by the way. I was not necessarily expecting you to mention me
Well,
at all in that response, but I appreciate it. Absolutely.
It is the truth.
Have there
I
been...
will also mention, I reached out to our legendary coach here at LaSalle University, Fran Dunphy, and he has had some connections. He's helped me to be able to talk to some people as well.
Have there been discouraging moments? Have there been times along the way where you thought, well, maybe there is a fatal flaw to COLA that you had to navigate or address? Were there times where you were discouraged and maybe you thought that you had run into a real roadblock?
I would say that there's sometimes, one of the discouraging things was the Reddit thread. We just seemed like we went viral on Reddit at one point, and the conversation took off, 1,000 comments, 5,000 upvotes, and it's just the nature of Reddit, I guess. In 2 days, the conversation was completely dead. Nobody was talking about it anymore. It was like, oh, I guess we're not gaining momentum after all. So that was kind of discouraging. In terms of the academic work, I don't know if I'd say there's anything that's really discouraging. There is the loophole. We haven't gotten into the academic part in terms of how airtight is this incentive compatibility. Mathematically, there is a loophole that I have not been able to get rid of. So it's intellectually disappointing to have that there. But at this point, we do believe it to be very rare and not something that teams would actually employ, except in very, very rare circumstances, possibly never. So there is that. I don't think it's a practical disappointment, but it's an academic disappointment. On the practical side, it's more a matter of what is it that people actually want? Because COLA is flexible. So we can go in the direction of let's be really, really airtight on the incentive compatibility. There's no tanking ever. But then you might lose some other things that you might like, such as the flexibility of trades and things like that. So for example, the suggestion that we are going to get rid of trade protections, COLA is also going to have to do that. We do not have a way to stay incentive compatible in the face of a team that can tank and get the 8th pick for themselves. So that sort of thing is disappointing just to not know exactly what kind of tuning the NBA might want. Because I'd like to be able to say, oh, this is what you're looking for. Here are the parameters. Let's pull out some simulations and try to get this in the direction that that the NBA would want.
Just one more nuts and bolts question, because I think a lot of people might learn best or understand best by example. So obviously under the current NBA draft lottery system, the preference of lot in the lottery is given to teams that have the worst record from just the most recent season at hand. Looking at COLA, and here as we record this, we're in the second half of the 2026 season, 2025-2026 season. Who would be the teams that would be at the top, the first few teams who would be right at the top of the lottery preference order, and why?
So if I recall correctly, Sacramento and Chicago are the top two teams in terms of the priority based on COLA. And that happens because, now I may be misremembering, but I believe we checked this. In the past 10 years combined, they have won one playoff series and have one top 3 draft pick. And so winning playoff series and getting high draft picks are what reduces your stockpile. And so they have not had much success in the playoffs, and they have not had much success in getting high draft picks. And so because of that, their stockpile just accumulates. And so at this point, they would have the highest probability of winning.
And so I think that's really important to reiterate. Yes, COLA gives grace to those struggling teams who, not only just because they're struggling, but because they've not necessarily had good luck in the draft lottery. And then also what determines what a struggling team is yes, how long it's been since they've won a playoff series, not just their win-loss record. So that's, again, how it helps to eliminate tanking, because tanking is about manipulating win-loss record more than anything else. So all very helpful. So then one more big picture question, and that is a question, Dr. Hiley, in your gut, what do you think? Is COLA eventually going to be adopted by the NBA?
I do not know if it is going to be adopted, but I do think that if it's not COLA, there is going to be a shift to looking at playoff track record, because that's the key that allowed us to do this, by not looking at regular season record and looking at playoff track record. That is how we're able to not induce tanking, because all right, it's the playoffs. I mean, it's the regular season. I'm going to be in the lottery. Okay, you're in the lottery, but your losses do nothing for you at this point. So there's no reason for you to lose more games. And okay, well, I'm just going to tank to miss the playoffs. Oh, but wait, that's the entire point of what I want to do as a team. The teams want to make the playoffs. They want to have success in the playoffs. So the only way to get a better advantage in the draft is to not do the very thing you want to do, which is make the playoffs. And so that is, I think that's the key, is to divorce the draft odds from the current standings. It's not your win-loss record, it's your playoff track record. And then in order to still help the worst teams, we do the carryover. I guess the carryover part's not mandatory. There would be other ways to look at a playoff track record and assign some probability without having the carryover, but that's the approach that we would suggest.
What's really fun about COLA is that this has not entirely been a solo effort. This has been a team effort. And so at this time, I would like to bring in the other members of your research team. That is Tana Duncan and Ilya Volkov. They are both undergraduates at LaSalle University. They are both in the computer science and mathematics programs. Welcome, Tana and Ilya.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, it's great to have you with us here on the podcast. And so, Tana, we'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about what brought you to LaSalle University.
For me, LaSalle, I play field hockey, so I was interested in the field hockey part of things, and then computer science is what sealed the deal, the program, and all the opportunities being in Philadelphia. So it was very exciting, and ultimately it was a whole combination of things: the location, the academics, and the sport.
Now, I'm not an expert on a Philly accent, but I don't think that your accent is a Philly accent. Tell us where you hail from.
Yes, a bit far away from Philly. I'm actually from South Africa, so it's my senior year now. I'm going into my last year, which is exciting. But yeah, very far from home.
And Ilya, tell us what led you to LaSalle University.
So I was looking for different universities to apply to in America, and I chose LaSalle because of the city. I guess because it's a big city, a lot of opportunities. Plus, I had a good computer science and math program. And again, I'm not from Philly. I'm from Moscow, Russia. So it was really exciting to study in America, to come here.
So Tana, what are you're obviously you're a computer science mathematics student. What are your career aspirations?
After I've finished at LaSalle, I'm hoping to do my master's. I'm looking into cybersecurity and software engineering. I'm not 100% sure yet, so hopefully this year I can solidify all my decisions. And then, yeah, just apply to a whole lot of schools and see which ones suit my future goals and everything.
And Ilya, what are your career aspirations?
I'm still a junior, so I have time to think, but I'm thinking I'll either try to find a job and stay here and then go to my master's, or I'll go to my master's right away. I'll probably have to start looking for schools next semester, but no, I can just relax for a little bit because I'm a junior.
So Ilya, tell us a little bit more about your contribution specifically to the COLA project.
So for the COLA project, I was doing a simulation just to prove that our COLA mechanism actually works. It was a simple simulation. It was like simple formulas for that, not something like really exciting, because I just looked up the team strength, not the specific players and aging. But my simulation actually helped us to prove that our loophole is really like not achievable at all, because it's only 1%, even less. It actually helped us a lot, because without it, we'll have to find the proof. And if we didn't find the proof, it would be really complicated. But that really helped us.
And that's a sign of a really good idea and really good research effort, is when the creators of the concept are the toughest critics of the concept, or the toughest scrutinizers of the concept. And it sounds like there's been a lot of really intense scrutiny of COLA to make sure that it is a sound idea. So kudos to you. Tana, what has been your contribution to the COLA project?
I was also mostly part of the computational side of things. So I developed the model or the code that used the historical data from teams' playoff success and their draft history, and then calculated the lottery indices that each team will have in 2025 currently, based on all their results from 1999 onwards.
And Tana, what has been the most enjoyable part of this process?
I think for me, honestly, I've enjoyed the whole process just because it's been such a different experience. We don't really have like a draft process or anything similar to that in South Africa. So it's been really cool learning about how all of that works here. So I kind of had to start like from the beginning because I didn't know much about it. So it's been really cool to learn about how it all works. And obviously I'm interested in sports. So it's been cool to like merge my major with one of my passions.
Ilya, what's been the most enjoyable part for you? Or in what ways have you developed through this process?
I think the most enjoyable part was when we actually wrote the paper itself, because we were meeting for like half a year, didn't really do much, but within like the last 2 weeks, we built up the whole paper from scratch. It was really exciting. Also, I would say meeting new people, emailing new people, talking to new people. I have a lot of connections now. That was really exciting too.
That's great. Tana, you're a field hockey player, as you mentioned. Are there any innovations that you would like to bring to the sport of field hockey to make that sport even better?
You know, it's definitely led me to think. So maybe one day I'll come up with something that can improve the sport. Hopefully that'll be cool. This might just be the start.
Well, thank you, Tana and Ilya, for joining. And thank you, Dr. Hiley, for joining. Dr. Hiley, is there anything else that you would like to add or share?
I think I'd like to mention the variant that came up just in the past couple of weeks. There was a Reddit thread that talked a lot about COLA, and we got pretty good reviews. The biggest criticism that people raised, other than criticisms we'd already addressed in the paper, was about the fact that we had taken away the incentive to tank, but we did not provide an incentive to actually win. So teams that were eliminated, there's no reason to lose, So you might as well win, right? But we didn't give them a real reason to win. It's just a matter of, okay, you're going to win because you're supposed to win. It's competition. Another variant, we call it McCarty COLA, named after one of my colleagues, Carl McCarty. He suggested tying the increment, instead of just being a flat, everybody gets 1,000 tickets, you're going to get a number of tickets that corresponds to the number of wins that you get. And not just the number of wins, but multiply it by your drought length, meaning how long has it been since you won a playoff series. So now, however bad you are, you haven't had a single playoff series win for a while, multiply that by your number of wins, you have a positive incentive to win, and the worst teams are still being helped. And we also added in that once you get a number 1 draft pick, that's going to cut off your drought as well. So you don't get multiple number 1 picks in a row. But this is now directly addressing that concern that there's no reason to win. Now we have a reason to win just by adjusting that increment rule. How many tickets does everyone get? Well, it could be flat. That's going to be an anti-tanking measure, but we can also give teams a number of tickets corresponding to how many wins they have and make it also helping the weaker teams, even though we are incentivizing winning.
And I think, again, that speaks to one of the real strengths of COLA, among many strengths, again, that it not only has a lot of promise in eliminating tanking, it has a lot of promise in doing so in a way that still gives preference to longstanding struggling teams or unlucky teams. But even if something in version 1.0 needs to be readjusted or recalibrated, there are so many different settings to COLA that can be readjusted to make the model even better. That's just a really appealing part of COLA. And that will be where we wrap up for our innovation segment today. Again, it's the carryover lottery allocation, the COLA project, an improvement on the NBA draft system. I want to thank Dr. Hiley. I want to thank Tana and Ilya so much for your time and your insight today. I really like this idea, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
The next to last thing I'll do in this episode is to acknowledge a next to last from the past. And in most cases, this will be a next to last from the world of sports. But in this case, it's a next to last from the world of movies. And one of my all-time favorite movies, Traffic, from the year 2000. Traffic won 4 Oscars, including Best Supporting Actor for Benicio del Toro, who makes just about any movie better, and Best Director for Steven Soderbergh, who actually had 2 chances to win that year because he was also nominated for Erin Brockovich. On a side note, Soderbergh has a familiarity and admiration for sports analytics, as he was almost the director for the movie Moneyball several years later, but that's a story for another day. In addition to Traffic's Oscar wins, it was also nominated for Best Picture, but it came up short to a worthy winner in Gladiator. But still, with all that acclaim at the time, it feels now like Traffic is very much an underrated or even forgotten movie. And it's not because of diminished relevance. In fact, its themes and topics are exceedingly relevant now. And its style of storytelling is something that has since become trendy, having separate storylines with their own self-contained suspense that add another layer of suspense in the way they eventually intersect. Now, in case you'd like to watch Traffic for the first time, I should note that this segment has spoilers. And Traffic has an amazing cast that includes Don Cheadle and Luis Guzman as DEA agents, and Catherine Zeta-Jones and Dennis Quaid and Stephen Bauer as some of the individuals that the DEA is trying to stop. Michael Douglas as the U.S. drug czar, who is well-resourced but overmatched. And Benicio del Toro, who is overmatched for different reasons in trying to fight a similar battle south of the border. Traffic is not an easy watch, and it is very poignant in that we have to make the most of small victories that get swallowed up by a seemingly impossible-to-win war on drugs. And those small victories are revealed in the movie's last 3 scenes. The third to last scene reveals a small victory in a clever and almost fun way for Don Cheadle's character. Another small victory is revealed in the very last scene of the movie, a scene with no dialogue that will tug at the heartstrings of any baseball fan, believe it or not. But the other small victory that's revealed in the scene in between is the subject of this next to last. For much of the movie, Michael Douglas's character, while serving as the U.S. drug czar, is also fighting his own war on drugs in his own home, witnessing firsthand the toll that drug addiction is taking on his daughter, played brilliantly by Erica Christensen. And eventually that situation gets even scarier as she goes missing altogether, sending Douglas searching for her. By the time Traffic reaches its next to last scene, we're relieved to see that the family is back together again. And we also see that Douglas's character has had to rethink everything he thought he knew and believed about fighting the war on drugs. What's less certain is whether Douglas's character has any plan or any place still in fighting that war on a national scale. But in this moving next to last scene, none of that matters. All that matters to him as a father is that his daughter is now safe again and has a future again. I highly recommend you watch or rewatch Traffic. And the last thing I'd like to do in this episode is to thank you for your engagement with the podcast. Remember, if you have an idea for a rule change or an innovation in sports that you'd like for me to scrutinize on the show, you can submit that by email, nick.elam@sportsrulepod.com, or X or Instagram @sportsrulепod. Like or subscribe wherever you find the podcast, and look for Season 1 episodes to be released every 2 weeks on Friday mornings. We'll see you next time.